Hi, and a warm welcome to this afternoon's event. This is our digital installation as part of the 5th Picture Gallery Composer Residency here at Royal Holloway, University of London. My name is Nathan James Dearden. I'm a composer and the artist manager for this scheme. And this afternoon, I am joined by Dr. Laura McCulloch, who is the art curator here at the college and works as part of the scheme. And also Dr. Tom Parkinson, who has been our lead tutor, who is lecturer in digital composition here at Royal Holloway as well. So welcome both. Hi. I just thought I'd first start asking a question just as to frame this project and introduce the people that will be watching this event. So Laura, how important is this sort of project and collaboration for your work in the arts collection?
Oh, so important. When we kind of cooked this up 5 years ago, I was so excited about it, and I've never stopped being excited about it, because I think what it brings to the art collections is new voices. And there's an audio quality that otherwise people coming to see the collections in the Picture Gallery wouldn't be able to experience that in the same way. I mean, the pictures have been hanging there for about 150 years in the same conversation. So then to have the music come in makes people make connections with them in completely different ways. And the pictures make connections with each other in completely different ways. And I just think it's really accessible. You could be any age and enjoy the music and the chance to see the pictures in a different way. And we recently started doing audio tours and audio description tours in the Picture Gallery. But the music, there's something about art and music that goes together. And I think that brings something really special to the collections.
Yeah, I think that's really beautiful, because one of the main reasons that we started chatting in my role as performance manager at the Department of Music was that we were in there a lot as a department in the Picture Gallery and around the amazing paintings and the collection. And there was little in the way of actually collaborating directly with what was around us and the space itself. So I think it's been fantastic over these 5 years, allowing a lovely creative space for composers to be able to respond to the collection and that level of collaboration that they might not have elsewhere.
We share that space, like music and the art share the space. But I think prior to this, there hadn't been, for a very long time, a real collaboration between the art and the music. There hadn't been a way to like come together in that shared space. And I think that's allowed it. You know, we have a great relationship with music, whereas we knew each other before, but we hadn't worked together. It's different. So I think it's going to open lots of doors.
Yeah. And that level of collaboration, I mean, Tom, as a composer who works all across the world and collaborates with amazing organizations and amazing artists, how important is that collaboration with art and other art forms for you?
It's really important. Like you say, it's kind of the core of what I do as a composer. But it's fairly rare that I get to compose with what you might call kind of fixed media or not time-based stuff. And it's a really wonderful opportunity, I think. And I wish I could do more of it, because obviously if you're collaborating with on a film, for example, or a show, you're constantly having to negotiate what's happening in time. But when you're working with a painting or with a kind of a sculpture, as a composer, everything about time is up to you, and you can therefore kind of collaborate with and interact with what it is that you're seeing in an entirely different way than you can when you're working with a film. And and obviously time is a huge aspect of what we kind of work with as composers, and that allows us to investigate things like kind of formal elements of music or whatever in ways that are not available in more normal kinds of collaboration.
Mm. In terms of the composers that we have this year, I mean, every year, for those who don't know, the Picture Gallery Composer in Residency has a sort of in-house ensemble or a sort of theme or brief every year. And this year, in the times that we're living in, we thought we would take advantage of creating digital installations. So bringing the art collection and the Picture Gallery to you at home. And Tom, in terms of the composers that we have at Royal Holloway, how varied are these responses?
Hugely varied, happily. I would have loved to have seen what they would do with in an acoustic context as well, these composers, because they're very capable of doing that. But yeah, within this, a huge variety. We've got some abstract things and some quite kind of concrete pieces of music, and things that are sort of generically inspired. And I don't mean generically in but like sort of identifiable, in what they're doing stylistically, and others that are more abstract. How you'd like to describe it. And for me, it's a real pleasure because most of the composers, there's a couple of exceptions, but most of them I've taught before, so I'm familiar with them primarily through their assignments and whatnot. So it's great to be able to see how they're taking the stuff that we've done in classes, for example, and using it in a more expressive sense where they're not having to worry about what their marks, but are just being creative with it. It's wonderful.
Yeah. I some of the conversations that we had starting out this project, and actually that happen every year for this scheme, how composers take a physical piece of work, an artifact or a piece of art that's hanging on a wall, and how do they respond to that? And I think it's been fascinating to see how each of the composers have differently done that, whether that's looking at the paint strokes and the brush paint on the canvas, or whether that's taking the architecture of the space and running with ideas on acoustic levels. I think the responses that we have had this year are really varied, like you've said, and yeah, I can't wait to hear them all.
Absolutely, and it says a lot about it says a lot about
sorry,
who. Don't worry. It says a lot about who they are as artists, that they are the variety of the approaches that they've got. So, as you say, some of them are approaching it conceptually, and some of them are approaching it in a more narrative kind of sense and a kind of programmatic sense. And it's interesting to see kind of who's doing what and how that ties in with the rest of the music that they are making.
So I'm really excited about the variety of the objects that they've chosen. For the first time, we've got someone doing a sculpture, Erina, and she's a bit of a pet love of mine. I love her story. So I'm going to be really excited to hear the musical response to her. And then we've got one duplication. I think, is that the first duplication we've ever had with the Man Proposes, God Disposes? So that's going to be interesting because they're going to have completely different responses. So I think that's going to be really interesting. And then people have chosen things that they haven't chosen before, not necessarily the big hitters. So that's going to be really interesting. And it's one of the reasons I really like this scheme, because they don't always choose the big hitters. So it really draws the visitor's attention to some other pictures that are really worthy of being looked at and engaged with. And perhaps I think the music is a really good way to get them to do that. And then we've got one person who's looking at the space as a whole. And that in itself is amazing, because it is a really awesome space. When you go in, if you've never been in before, it's so huge and lofty. You really get a sense, okay, I'm in this quite unique atmosphere and unique space. So to see how someone deals with that musically and that feeling that you get when you come in, that's going to be really great as well.
Great. Thank you, Tom, and thank you, Laura. For the rest of this event, we're going to welcome our composers to chat to us about their work, and then we're going to hear the world premiere of these digital installations. So stick around, and thank you once again, Laura and Tom.
Thank you.
So we're here with one of our Picture Gallery Composer in Residence composers for 2020-21. It's our fifth cohort, and we're here with Jordan Lewis. So hi, Jordan. Thanks for joining us. Could you just introduce yourself and the name of the work that you've written for the residency? And also just tell us a little bit about the inspiration and why you chose that.
Yeah, so I'm a third-year undergrad student at the moment, studying at Royal Holloway doing music. And for this project, I chose the painting Man Proposes, God Disposes. Edwin Landseer painted it in 1864, and it really appealed to me for a number of reasons. So it basically shows two polar bears in an Arctic landscape attacking a shipwreck and the human remains from Sir John Franklin's 1845 expedition to find the fabled Northwest Passage. This ended in disaster, and there were no known survivors. And it was a landmark moment, damaging the prestige of the Royal Navy and British imperial conquest, and undermining ideas of British superiority in exploration. So the painting shows a disturbing interpretation of the grisly aftermath of the expedition, highlighting that blind faith and that the ignorance and arrogance of men would and did cost lives. So many of the crew would have been deliberately kept in the dark about how successfully or unsuccessfully they were progressing and the severity of the disastrous circumstances they were in. Many also would never have expected the fate they would meet before boarding the ships. The men allegedly turned to cannibalism in order to survive the harsh environment too. So the story is very horrific and as relevant today as it was then in many ways. In the case of the 1845 expedition, men were driven to chart new territory at the expense of people's lives. Some of the leaders of the expedition were reluctant to retreat despite the mission being doomed to failure. And on top of that, it would have been disastrous for the men's families as well. And also it would have undermined Britain's position as a civilized world power.
Wow, what a powerful starting point, Jordan. Thanks for preparing that.
So from that, really, I mean, there's just so much in the history of that picture, and the picture itself, which is quite kind of grotesque, with the polar bear attacking what we think is human remains, and the Arctic's quite a vicious Arctic. How did you get from that object to the music, and was there a particular process that you developed in doing that?
Yeah, I'd say there was. After I looked at the painting and I researched it a bit, I realised there was a TV series called The Terror, which was shown on TV, first shown in 2018, and so I thought I'd give that a watch. It's a 10-part fictional drama, and it's all based on the Lost expedition. So I decided to watch it. It follows the crews of the two ships, the HMS Erebus and the HMS Terror, that set out to find the Northwest Passage. And yeah, I obviously used that for inspiration. So basically, the overall story is that the expedition seems doomed from the start, and there's sort of this disagreement amongst members in commanding roles as to sort of how to proceed when they're met with different problems that are out of their control. There's also a supernatural element to the series and various threats to all the crew. So these include horrific weather conditions and also a lone, supernaturally influenced polar bear that attacks and kills members of the crew. Further to this, there's a revelation discovered by the assistant surgeon on board, who's called Harry Goodsir, and he discovers that all the men are suffering from the fatal long-term effects of lead poisoning, which they're getting from the tinned food that they're eating on board. So over the course of the series, there's sort of this growing dissent amongst members of the crew as it becomes clearer over time how severe the situation is, and trust in the leadership erodes in response, and some men begin to plan a mutiny. And then in the final episode, the final episode sort of evokes Landseer's painting in some ways, as there's sort of a standoff between sort of the last remaining men and a polar bear. And that's sort of towards the end of the series, and it seems very sort of inspired by the painting by Landseer. So yeah, both the series and the painting really inspired the music I've written. I watched all 10 episodes over the course of about a week, and sort of in between watching, I'd write bits of music. I wrote a lot of these for string quartet, which sort of remains at the core of the composition in terms of like the instrumentation.
Mm.
And during the process as well, I also made a list of sort of different sounds I heard watching the series and different sounds I thought about, which I could use in the composition to create sort of the sounds of the creaking on the ships and the sea and the icy landscape, and the people involved as well, just sounds that would reflect that. And part of that process meant sort of going around the house and just recording different sounds of like different household and garden objects. You might be able to tell what they are, but none of them are actually from a ship, but hopefully I've sort of created some of the sounds that you might hear on a ship in the icy Arctic. Arctic.
That's amazing that you've created an all-encompassing musical response, and obviously a clearly well-researched one as well. I mean, I can't wait to see whether your music reflects how horrifying the BBC Terror series is, as everybody who's been talking about it in the press or with friends, or even myself and Laura have been talking about how scared we were. I couldn't sleep at night after watching the series. I'm really glad actually that you picked up on that. It's a timely thing to pick up on.
Yeah, it didn't help when I was watching that. I was reading Michael Palin's book Erebus. So I was like going to sleep having watched that, and then my reading to sleep was that. So I didn't really escape it. It really stays with you. But I really like that you picked up on the connections between that series and our painting, because I do think that there are connections and that they must have known our painting. But I also like that in a way, Lanzia's response, like your response in the series, it's a response to that historic event. And it's these different ways that people have been able to respond to it, partly to do with time, because they wouldn't have had the same media back in his day. But they're all a response to this, horrific mystery and the disaster of that expedition. So I'm really intrigued to hear what your piece sounds like, and also to listen out for all the things from your house that you've discovered in there.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was going to say, actually, is there anything else that you'd like to tell us about the piece, like the final product, your final response? And if there is anything really specific we should be listening out for, like any of those tools from around the garden shed?
I mean, I'd like for everyone just to listen to it and sort of interpret it in their own way. I think it's sort of, it's very much inspired by the painting and the series as well. But I mean, it's sort of split into sort of two halves. So the first half aims to sort of capture the thrill and the anticipation of setting out on a sea voyage into the unknown, which the sailors must have felt when they first departed. And then the latter half sort of transitions into something quite different, transitions into feelings of uncertainty and unease. And it also reflects the frozen landscape, and the severe conditions, and also the fear and the desperation of the men on board.
Wow, a true musical journey. Great. Thank you so much, Jordan.
Okay.
We are joined by our next composer, William Chu, as part of our Picture Gallery Composer in Residency and our 5th cohort for 2020-21. William, could you just introduce yourself and tell us the name of the piece that you've created?
So I'm William. I'm a final year student in final year music student in Royal Holloway. So the name of my piece is picked directly from the painting. So it's called, let me get it up, Snow Scene by Ludwig Munti. I don't know how to pronounce the name. I might have butchered it, but yeah.
So, because I was going to ask you which is the piece that you chose, and I guess now we know. I want to know, why did you choose that piece? Were you drawn to it? Were there several pieces and you had to kind of like choose which one? Tell us a bit about what process did you go through to choose the initial artwork?
I was quite drawn to the painting because the feeling I had was during November, December-ish, because of the pandemic and stuff. Most of my friends have left and it was winter and it snowed. So I was like, yeah, I was quite drawn to that painting because of this, yeah.
Yeah, it's a real personal pandemic kind of experience, and
yep.
Yeah, I really like that. There's that really personal meaning behind the music for you, and you're directly kind of reflecting what the pandemic meant to you and how it felt to be here in a pandemic. So it's really interesting.
Yeah.
It's amazing that the art collection has inspired that as well, and has inspired your music creation. I think that's a really beautiful synergy there, beautiful conversation. I'm interested to find out, William. So you chose the Snow Scene. What did you do to go from that? Was there a process from going from this amazing artwork to your response?
So on the description, let me get it up again. Sorry about that. So yeah, the description says about the color palette that the artists focus on. So it's very limited to like white, grays, and blacks. So I kind of mix the idea of being cold, and then I see the white and black as two extremes. So the white kind of represent a higher pitch feel, and then the black represents like the lower pitch feel. And this creates like an effect of like coldness, because in the middle pitch range is where our voice pitch is. And then humans subconsciously relate that to like warmth and love, sort of. Yeah. So I'll try to emulate that. And then in the middle of the painting, there's this like yellow streak of light. So it kind of like represents, to me, it's like represent hope and warmth. So towards the end of my piece, I've included like a string ensemble section, which is filled with like the middle pitch range. So it's kind of stand out. And
it's really gorgeous that you've picked up, not necessarily on the narrative of the work that actually one would maybe put onto the painting itself, but has used the landscape and the architecture of the piece and the palette and the colors to dictate your musical process. I think that's really exciting, and I can't wait to hear how that sounds.
Yeah, I'm really liking how the colors you've directly linked the colors to pitch. So it's like you're translating it from the canvas into something audio, and I love that idea. I'm really, really excited to hear how that turns out.
The piece is also largely inspired by Ryuichi Sakamoto's piece for the Revenant movie, the main theme of it. So I've like emulated it into that piece as well. So there's like a snow theme for the piece, for the music. Yeah.
Yeah, I can see that film, which is about snow and ice and cold, and I think the people who are doing the ice fishing, Munter's piece, they would be experiencing some of that too. And I think partly that picture is about how difficult it is for people to survive in winter, which I think is definitely a theme from The Revenant as well. So I really like that you picked up on those two things and kind of made it quite contemporary too in that way. So before we hear your piece, can you tell us a little bit about the final musical response itself? And is there anything that you think we should be listening out for when we hear it?
It's like imagining I try to express the feeling of cold and loneliness, and then towards the end, I've teased in like a section of like warmth and energy. And then, part of the description says that it's also that streak of yellow line is also the sun that never rises. So I feel like I might, I don't want to end that piece in a positive note. So I've reintroduced like the Ryuichi Sakamoto section-ish to end it. It's like,
Great.
Yeah.
Thanks, William.
I think it's a nice way of looking at the pandemic, because I think lots of people will feel similarly about the loneliness and the coldness. I think I was in, it must have been March, and for some reason, Here Comes the Sun came on with the Beatles, and the lyrics for that were so perfect. But I think you've also encapsulated it, both extracting from the painting and then bringing in the music together. And I'm hoping that people will really feel, kind of empathy with you, and feeling like, oh, well, I felt like that too. So I think it's a really lovely thing to have come out of the pandemic, a really nice personal response to it.
Yeah, hopeful that I could touch into that as well.